Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia here. Welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 Week 3 preview. So, for Week 3, we are travelling to DC. It's Washington Justice. It's their homestand, one of 5 of their homestands this season. They have got, I think, the most homestands out of anyone, so Washington really will know how to put on a show after this league ends later on this year. But we've got a chunkier homestand than what we had last week. Last week we only had 4 games and only 4 teams on show, but this time around we've got a lot more to see for ourselves this week. So, it's held at the Anthem in Washington, and this week we'll see the return of some of the teams from Week 1 and the returns of some of the teams from Week 2. Sorry Atlanta, you are waiting for your turn. It will be next week when we travel to Houston, where we will see Atlanta for the first time. So, we are going to see 6 games this week. It's going to be really interesting because there's going to be some pretty big games going on this weekend at both ends of the league. Yes, I know it's early to be saying that, but there's going to be some really interesting games going on because a lot of them will indicate exactly where these teams are in terms of their power levels. It'll be the first week where we really get to see where these teams are going to kind of iron themselves out. So, without further ado, let's get into it. We will kick off on Saturday, February the 22nd at 8 PM Greenwich Mean Time. And this is going to be a barnstormer. It's New York Excelsior taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. So, Philadelphia Fusion by far the team that was on top last weekend. New York Excelsior, one of the teams that were on top the weekend before. Obviously, it was New York and Philadelphia's respective homestands, so that's something we have to take into account here. They are on completely neutral ground, which should be really interesting to see. So, Philadelphia, they looked good last weekend, but let's be honest, they weren't against some of the best teams in the league. But neither were the Excelsior. In Week 1, they took on the London Spitfire and the Boston Uprising. Well, Boston Uprising are expecting to do very well. London Spitfire are a complete rookie team, really, and London did actually give them a game, so that's something perhaps to be a bit apprehensive about for New York. But the good thing for New York this weekend is the fact that they can really concentrate on the Philadelphia match, because their second match of the weekend, to be quite honest, the way that team has played in their previous matches, they should win that without any preparation at all. But we will get onto that in a minute. In terms of what I think will happen in this New York versus Philadelphia match, I think New York will edge it. Honestly, I think Philadelphia are going to be a really good team this season, don't get me wrong. But I think New York might just have that little bit of extra quality right now to edge out Philadelphia. But it's going to be a close one. It's going to be a close one, but I think New York should be able to edge this out. But I was talking about a certain Pepegas team earlier on, and the next game we have, which will be at 10 PM GMT, will be the Battle of the Pepegas. So we have the Boston Uprising taking on the Houston Outlaws. Houston Outlaws, absolutely the worst team we've seen so far this season. They were all over the place last weekend, losing heavily and getting swept by the Florida Mayhem and the Washington Justice, the two weaker teams in the Battle of Brotherly Love last weekend, so they didn't even have to take on the Philadelphia Fusion. Goodness knows what they would have done to them. But Houston Outlaws come into this, and this is a game, like, I know it's very early in the season, but for confidence, this is a must-win against Boston. Boston are another arguably Pepegas team, right? They were nowhere to be seen really against New York apart from the really early stages in Week 1. But they did only play that game against New York, so that's really early stages to be judging the Boston Uprising. And honestly, I think Boston will win this game. Just looking at the way Houston played, just be organised, Boston, and you will beat Houston. Be organised but mediocre and you'll beat Houston Outlaws. They just have no synergy right now. They don't know what to do. So I am going to pick Boston for this one. I think it possibly could be quite a close match. It's a big teller for Boston because it's their only match of the weekend, and it'll be their most winnable match of the season. Without a doubt, and that's even at this early stage. This will be their most winnable match of the season. It's not even at Houston's homestand, which is next week. Boston, you have to win this game. That's what I'm saying here. So, moving on, and at midnight or 12 AM on the 23rd GMT, we have the Paris Eternal in action against the Washington Justice. This should be interesting because it will show up which of these teams has the better entire team, right? we know the Washington Justice's DPS are really good, Corey and Stratus. We also know that the DPS of the Paris Eternal, XZ and Nico are really, really good. They showed that in week 1, although they did lose to Toronto. So this is going to be the battle of who can have the better tanks and the better supports. I think Paris Eternal have got a really decent support line, but so would the Washington Justice arguably as well. So it may actually just come down to the tanks, which is perhaps where Washington might win this out, because Paris won't yet have their new off-tank Hanbin. They will probably have Smex back now, but Smex and either Bembest or No Smite, probably Bembest I'd imagine, not No Smite, or they might go with the double main tank No Smite Bembest thing again. Either way, I think Vote and Raw could win out the tank battle here. Depends how they turn up. It's going to be a really close game, I think, and honestly XE could carry Paris Eternal once more with his McCree, but I don't think he'll be able to carry as hard as he did against the likes of London with Corey and Stratus on the opposite side, right? So if Paris Eternal can enable XE and Nico like they did in week 1, I think it's really difficult to call this one. I will go for the Paris Eternal, but I think it's going to be a 5-mapper. I think it's going to be a 5-mapper if not more. I think this will be a really close match. But remember, this is Washington Justice's homestand as well. That's something we mustn't forget when we're looking at this season. So Washington could ride the home crowd here. They could ride the home crowd and get a narrow victory, but I think it'll be a narrow victory either way. So moving on to the Sunday then. Well, we did move on to the Sunday because it was midnight, but Sunday, February the 23rd at 8 PM, we have the New York Excelsior in action against the Pepegas Houston Outlaws. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. I did say that the New York Excelsior probably wouldn't have to do much preparation for their second match of this weekend. If New York Excelsior do not 3-0 the Houston Outlaws will either have had to make a massive change between weeks, or New York Excelsior will have to be very, very bad. I would not expect New York Excelsior to drop a map to Houston Outlaws. And if they do, seriously, New York, don't. Just don't. There's no need to drop a map to the Houston Outlaws. Please don't do that. You're too good for the Houston Outlaws right now. Sorry, Houston fans. It's just Houston are so trash right now. It's unbelievable. But New York should get a 3-0 victory over Houston Outlaws. I'd be very surprised if they didn't. So, moving on to 10 PM on the Sunday, we will see the Toronto Defiant taking on the Philadelphia Fusion. So, Toronto Defiant back in action after their one game in week 1. It's still only one game this week for the Toronto Defiant, but I think they will come up short against the Philadelphia Fusion. Now, Toronto Defiant rely heavily on Shawfall, and the rest of the team, I think this is where people like Beast get caught out big time. Beast did have a decent display in week 1 though, but we must remember this was against a Paris Eternal side. So I don't think the Paris Eternal are as good as Philadelphia Fusion right now. I don't know about anyone else, but the Paris Eternal are good, don't get me wrong, but they're not as good as the Philadelphia Fusion. I think the Philadelphia Fusion will be able to show up Toronto Defiant's weaknesses and get the win here. Although I would expect Defiant to take a map or two off of the Fusion. I would not be surprised if this is closer than some people expect. I don't think it will be a 3-0 for the Fusion. I'd be very surprised, and I think that'd be very disappointing from a Toronto Defiant point of view if it was a 3-0 for the Fusion. But, again, I wouldn't be really disappointed from a Toronto point of view if they managed to make this a really close game but still lose. I think Philadelphia Fusion are going to be one of the better teams this season. So, Toronto Defiant have the opportunity here to throw a gauntlet down to the chasing pack of the top 6 or so that we are thinking about in our power rankings right now. They have the opportunity here to throw down the gauntlet and say, look, we can go toe-to-toe with one of the big teams of this season, or supposed big teams of this season. So, hey, everyone else, now it's your turn. So it's an opportunity for the Toronto Defiant, but I would expect a 3-1 odd Philadelphia Fusion win here. But moving on to our last game of the weekend, it'll be at midnight on the 24th, or it'll be after the Toronto-Philadelphia game, whenever that finishes. We have the London Spitfire against the Washington Justice. So things don't get easier for the London Spitfire, do they? Now, they had actually a good display against New York Excelsior. I don't think I can deny that, really. They did turn up against New York Excelsior, and they did give them a game, although they kind of run out of steam at the end. But against Paris Eternal, they were bad. They were bad. And I don't know whether that was an over-concentration on the New York Excelsior match, and them taking the Paris Eternal match a bit for granted. If that is, that's very poor. But this is London Spitfire's only game this weekend, obviously, so they can literally put all their preparation into this Washington Justice match. Plus, they have had the opportunity to see Washington Justice play 2 times last week, so they have prior knowledge as well. Also, they'll be able to have the knowledge of Paris Eternal taking them on the day before. The thing is, for London, this is Washington Justice's homestand. And as much as I liked Glister and Babel against New York, I don't think they can pop off like Corey and Stratus can. And I think that London will honestly lose the tank battle here. I think Bernard is better than Ellie Vogt when he wants to be. But J-Mac versus Raw right now, it's not a battle. It's a stomping for Raw here. Raw should win out over J-Mac. J-Mac was arguably the worst tank we saw in week 1. So London have got a lot of work to do. I'm not too down on London's support line. I think London's support line's okay, Sanguinar and Hailey. But I think London will lose to Washington, unfortunately. I think they've got the potential in the future to be better than they are now. But right now, I don't see them taking down a Washington Justice side that is pretty much on the same page. I think they will win the tank battle here, and I think that means Washington Justice will come out on top. But that is it for our preview of Week 3. Week 3 should be really interesting. It's a lot of telling matches like Boston versus Houston, like New York versus Philadelphia. And in some respects, London versus Washington is a teller as well, along with Paris versus Washington, because we will know kind of where London are. If London get really, really trounced by Washington, then we know London are verging on Pepegas tier. And if Paris versus Washington is really close, and Washington stomp London, I think we're looking at Paris Eternal and Washington being at least mid-table. So that's kind of the takeaways from this. But it'll be really interesting. It's nice to see some more games than we had in week 2. I'm not gonna lie. And it only gets better the week after when we travel to Houston, which should be really, really interesting. But for now, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.